wanted to talk a little bit just about what we're doing and how the film came about. ZSun-Nee was the actress that portrayed Christina Watson. She's a historical interpreter, and Dr. Emilie Amt is a historian, a local historian, and she is formerly on the board of Tolson's Chapel. She's still an active member with us. So this video started because we have an experiential learning committee, and our goal is to teach Tolson's history by reenacting some of the members. People call them characters, but they were real people. So some of the members that inhabited and attended the chapel and whose families attended the Freedmen's Bureau School. Christina Watson is the first person that we've done the video on. Our next video hopefully will be on one of the teachers, a male from the school. But that's how this video came about. And so the challenge that we faced was coming up with a documentary with the dialogue and the true accuracy, historic accuracy of the life of that real person. So Emilie gave us a draft based on the history that had already been well researched, partially by Edie Wallace, who many of you may know, and also by Emilie. And so with their combined research, we had a draft of what we wanted to say about Teenie. We used a lot of her own words. We had images that you saw, if you are familiar with Sharpsburg in Washington County, you saw a lot of local images as we made this film. And we wanted it to be that way. We wanted it to be the sites that would have been seen, obviously with some changes through the years, but would have been seen if a person was in Sharpsburg. We also used a filmmaker whose specialty was videos, music videos. And so it was a challenge, and he said an honor for him to get out of the music video genre and to do something historical and very important. Interestingly enough, he said to me, "Oh, Ms. Bridgett, you know, I showed this to my mother, and my mother said she was so proud of me, and she hadn't said that yet about him, about his work." And so it's when you're telling the story of history and you have those connections, real people, modern people being impacted by that, that to me says we're doing the right thing and we're on the right path. And so again, our goal at Tolson's Chapel is to tell that story. There are many stories that we can tell about the people that live there. You may or may not know that Tolson's is not an active church anymore. It was deconsecrated by the United Methodist Church. We are now a National Historic Landmark. We've been designated that by the National Park Service. We also are open if you would like to visit us every first Saturday. We were just there this past Saturday. Every first Saturday from 10 a.m. to 2. If you would like to become a member of the Friends of Tolson's Chapel, you certainly may do that by visiting our website, tolsonschapel.org. All right. So are you telling me that you in the back didn't hear what I was saying? Could you hear? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, I'll still use this stuff. But you're welcome to become a member. We also have a Facebook page that we like to keep fairly active, and we'd encourage you to be a member of that also. So what I'll do now is stop talking and pass the mic over to, I think, Emilie first to talk a little bit about the research, and then ZSun-Nee to talk about the joys and challenges of being a historical reenactor, and then you all can ask us anything we'll attempt to answer. Okay. Anything about the project.
So is the mic live?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to use the mic, although I have a loud teacher voice. So I've been involved with Tolson's for a while now. I don't know, maybe 10 years. And I was on the board for a while. I'm a historian. I'm a retired professor from Hood College. And we actually, I think this is the second video we did. We did the one with, right? So each with Nancy Campbell. So the first, each one has a character, a person from Tolson's Chapel, and also a theme. And the first one had the character or person of Nancy Camel, who is well known in the Black history of Washington County, and is has sort of a tenuous connection to Tolson's Chapel, but did leave a Bible to Tolson's Chapel, and her picture hangs in the chapel today. And then its theme, that first one that we did during the pandemic, was emancipation, was freedom. Freedom was the theme. So then we looked for another sort of overarching theme for our second one, our second video, and that theme was community, as you saw. And the person that we chose to represent community, someone who had a lot of connections to other people, was Teenie Watson, whose story was really easy to craft and tell, because Teenie Watson and her husband Hillary Watson were interviewed in 1913 by a man who was putting together stories of ordinary people who lived through Civil War battles. And he published these stories in 1915. He did not name Hillary or Teenie Watson in his book. The book is called Battleground Adventures. But there's enough internal evidence. In fact, Hillary names himself. He gives his first name when he's talking. And there's enough internal evidence in the book to identify both Hillary and the unnamed Christina. And so a number of historians have identified Christina. And we have these two narratives told supposedly in their own words, probably edited quite a bit by the interviewer, but very colorful, very rich, very detailed about their experiences during the battle, and full of language, like when she says it was a squally time, a squally time. I'm sure that was really her language. And so we wanted to get that into the script for ZSun-Nee to use. And just, a number of other colorful language, pieces of colorful language like that. And her whole outlook, I think, comes through very clearly when she's interviewed and when she's reminiscing about the battle. And she reminisces about a number of other things too. So we extended that over the course of her life. We have other information about Christina and Hillary from the census and from other records. And of course, they are both buried in the cemetery at Tolson's Chapel. Tolson's doesn't have any records of its own. The cemetery is really its only record book. And we do have the burial records, which were discovered just a few years ago, but they sort of duplicate the graveyard. And so I did a first draft of the script, and then we had a committee really that worked on, and Bridgett and ZSun-Nee were both part of that committee, that worked to revise the script until we were happy with it. And then ZSun-Nee, of course, interpreted it as the actor portraying Teenie. And I'm sure you all agree, she did a fabulous job. So, I'm open for questions later, but I will hand over the mic to ZSun-Nee now.
Hello, thank you. My name is ZSun-Nee Miller Matama, and when you portray someone from history, it's almost as if you're just walking them right out of the grave and right into the live stage or in front of the camera. And what you need is a good script, and we had that. You also need someone who supports what you're doing, and we had that here too. So for me, it was not just learning or speaking the lines, but it was finding something inside myself that I could relate to. And you'll have to agree that everything that she said was something that if you thought about in today's world, you could say, yeah, I get that. That is where we are, because we are there. So it's the most wonderful thing. It's a challenge because you don't know the nuances, perhaps, of people who live there. I've done reenactments, let's see, well, I'm not going to say how long, just I just get older by the minute, but let's see, I guess for 30 years, okay. So I kind of am familiar with what you have to do to overcome some of the challenges, putting your own personality aside, and yet you never do it fully. You're always a part of everything that you recreate. But the point was just being able to bring forward her feelings as you imagine them to be. And I really, it was a joy. There was something about Teenie Watson that I said this to Bridgett from the beginning. There was something about Teenie Watson that just, I don't know, it just came to me. It's been like that from the moment I heard about her. And I just love her. And if she walked in the door right there, I'd just get right up and go hug her. I have to apologize to all of you, but I would get up to go hug her. But I think that the difficult part is, first of all, holding on and honoring the script, and yet being able to color it with something that makes it seem like a human exchange. Because words are just words on a piece of paper. And that doesn't go very far. You have to be able to bring life to those words. So it's knowing a little bit about the history, it's understanding what she must have felt, and sometimes looking back into your own life and seeing how your ancestors would perhaps have felt about what was going on. So it brought to me the love of that everyone had of the area, Sharpsburg, and also her love of her family and her community. That's what you intended, right? And that's what I felt as I was doing it. How do we connect this community? So joys and challenges, and all together, a great deal of fun. So, okay. And would you like to turn it back to you?
Any questions?
I was just trying to figure a little about what happened, after the war. I take it that Hillary continued to work at the Otto farm where he had been enslaved prior to the war, and he continued working there the rest of his life. And then Hillary and Tina did not have children of their own, but they adopted a young woman named Ida.
A little baby, almost a baby. She was a toddler or a baby when they adopted her.
And she's up to 15 years old in the movie. But I wonder what happened to her. What was her story?
Well, so she went on to marry a young man in Sharpsburg, a neighbor in Sharpsburg, and eventually she moved to Hagerstown. And I don't remember all the details of her life. I went into it, I noodled around and figured out what happened to her. I research a lot of people, and I don't always remember all the details off the top of my head. But Ida Watson, who became Ida, she married Alexander somebody, I think. I started with an A, I think, but I may have that wrong. She married a young man who was a neighbor of theirs on High Street. And then eventually she may have moved to Hagerstown before she married. And then I think she came back to help her mother out, either because her mother was old or maybe because Nancy, the grandmother, was getting too old. I don't remember. There was some back and forth to Hagerstown. But she did marry.
Did they maintain their relationship with Tolson's chapel?
Excuse me?
Did they maintain a relationship with Tolson's chapel?
Most of the black families on that street in Hagerstown in Sharpsburg did, but I could not say for sure whether Ida did, or whether Ida eventually ended up in Hagerstown. I just don't recall. Sorry.
That's right.
So who has been your main audience for this film? Who?
So our main audience so far has
Yeah.
been the local Washington County community.
Well, you're showing it in schools, you're showing it in churches. What kind of groups have you approached with it? And what kind of reaction have you had?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, and I just wondered, what kind of feedback and reaction have you had?
So we've shown it at the battlefield.
Oh, okay.
And
Makes sense.
that's been our primary audience because the visitors, we're at the base of the battlefield. Well, you might not know. So we're at the base of the battlefield, and that's where the church was. And that's our big connection to the battlefield. And so many of the people that visit there are directed to Tolson's Chapel, and when people obviously come to Tolson's, some of them, believe it or not, aren't familiar with the battlefield. And so it's reciprocal, but they obviously have more visitors than we do. And so it's been people that are interested in history. No, we have not offered it to schools. We have an education program for school-age children,
Okay,
but it's for K through 8. And so we don't have, and also we're a historical building, and so we don't have electricity. And so we would not be able to offer it to schools in that way.
gotcha.
So it's been through the battlefield mainly. And at the library, we were here last year, we're back again this year, we've been invited back again this year.
Oh, great. So it's actually shown at the battlefield site?
It has been shown at
Yeah.
the battlefield site, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
But not regularly.
No,
Yeah, okay.
but if you have a place you'd like it shown, we love to accommodate you, so think about it.
The man back there in the blue stripe, his hand's not for a long time ago. Right there, sir, you're sitting right there. 1, 2, 3, yes, you, yes.
Okay. Where did Tolson, the name Tolson come from? And I'm not very religious, but were you Baptist, Lutheran, Independent,
So Tolson was the name of, I believe, the second minister of the
the
church,
second minister?
and it was a Methodist church.
Methodist.
And before it was deconsecrated, a Methodist church. Yes, sir?
In the commentary, they mentioned that it became a public school. I know a lot of the support for Black Freedmen's Bureau and things like that went away with the Rutherford Hayes election in 1876, or 77, I guess is when it actually happened. But, was it a public school, and how long was it a public school? With, I presume, taxpayer support. I'm sure it was segregated, but it was publicly supported?
Well, initially, it was privately supported by the
Right.
members of Friends of Tolson's Chapel, and it did serve as a Freedmen's Bureau school. As you said, it was closed as a Freedmen's Bureau school because the Freedmen's Bureau was disbanded.
Right.
But the church maintained it at some point, and Em, you might know the dates, at some point, Washington County Public Schools
Well, that's, yeah.
decided that they wanted to use it, it served their purpose, and so it became a public Washington County school. Em, you
Yeah.
might-
In the chapel. So the Freedmen's Bureau never supported it financially.
Mhm.
It was always supported by the Black community. The Freedmen's Bureau helped to find a teacher,
Mhm.
but that was pretty much, and, so gave maybe some organizational support. The reports were sent to the Freedmen's Bureau, but it was very patchy in the beginning, and it ceased to be a Freedmen's Bureau school after a few years. Then it became a public school very quickly, supported by the county, but at a very low rate. And so that was it was a Washington County colored school, quote unquote, for until late in the 19th century, and sometime in the 90s, it's the 1890s, a new building was built on the land that Hillary Watson that you hear Teeny saying that Hillary wants to buy. He then bought that land, another lot on the street, and then a new school building, which is now a house, still standing there. If you drive on the high street, you'll see a little house that looks kind of like a schoolhouse. That was built as a new, quote unquote, colored school. And the school was moved out of the chapel into that school in the late 1890s, or in the 1890s. And it continued to be Washington County colored school number whatever, the Sharpsburg colored school. At that point, it was moved there, out of the chapel. The chapel was sort of happy to get its chapel back and not have the wear and tear of a school being run there.
And when did the Methodists deconsecrate? When was it deconsecrated or dropped as a Methodist church?
1998, late 1900, like maybe
Oh,
80s.
Yeah, 80s. There, because it still served as a church until the last member died.
Right.
And then.
But they were only having like monthly or even once a year
Yes.
services. It was
Mhm.
very, very seldom.
I think it was 1997.
It said on one of those things, 1998.
Yeah.
So I thought that might be
I
the
think,
year.
I think that's right.
And as an aside, you mentioned that the house that Hillary built, the second house, was still standing, but the first house is also still there. The greenhouse that was in the video
Mhm.
is still there also, so Hillary was quite a builder. And that's what.
Is the chapel the original or is it a reconstruction?
No, it's
No, it's
the original building. It's been extensively restored, but most of it is original. That those shingles that were on it that were later attachments had to be taken off, but it was really intensively, beautifully restored by professional preservationists.
What are the oldest photographs of the building? How old are the oldest photographs of the building you have?
It depends on which photographs. There's photographs from when it was still in use as a church that you saw there, and there's photographs from when it had been, closed up and was not in use, and then there's photographs from when it was first being restored, the early stages of restoration, and from now. So there were a couple of stages of the restoration. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
Oh, well, this gentleman first.
Okay. Were you able to locate Freedmen's Bureau records, and if so, where did you find them?
So Edie Wallace, who was the president of the organization for many years and is a fabulous historian, is the main researcher of Tolson's Chapel. And she did use the Freedmen's Bureau records for the school, which are very few. There aren't that many. But, and they don't list the students, they just have like how many attended this week and that week. And we wish there were more detailed records. But I believe they are in the National Archives.
They are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So if you know Sharpsburg a little bit, you try to picture all the things that you so eloquently presented in your talk. And the tavern is another physical place that strikes my imagination. It's like Captain Bender's, is it? But do we know what basement they were in that you were speaking
That's one of the
about?
big mysteries about, it was Delaney's Tavern, but no one has been able to pin down exactly where Delaney's Tavern was, or even who was the enslaver that Teeny was either owned by or hired out to at the time of the Civil War. It's just an unknown.
What I've been told, though, is that it was just across the street from what the ice cream was.
From the ice cream?
From Nutters.
Okay, from Nutters?
That's what
Okay.
I've been told by people. who-
Across the main street or across the side
Just
street?
across.
Well, that's Captain Bender's, isn't it?
No, that's the main
No,
street.
no.
That's the main
The
street,
side-
yeah.
Nutters is on the
Well,
side.
Nutters is up.
Captain Bender's,
It's on
maybe.
Harper's Ferry Road.
The
Yeah,
side
yeah.
street.
But that's what I've been told by people who've lived there in the
Okay.
town for a long time. Maybe there was quite a mystery.
So a mystery is afoot.
It is
Yeah.
history.
Well, maybe we could find out Lee's, where Lee was, and if he was in there, that was probably in the records.
There's a controversy about which day he went in, because
Yeah.
Teeny says he was in there on, maybe it was Wednesday, maybe Tuesday, I forget which. She says a particular day, but historians say it could not have been that day. She's remembering in 1913
Yeah.
when she says this, so she could easily have gotten the day
Gotten
wrong.
wrong,
But most
okay,
historians
yeah.
say, no, it had to have been the day before.
Well, an interesting sidelight is that Lee was very active. He rode around to different vantage points and actively commanded in the field, and that's why with lesser men, he could move around and keep the Union at bay. McClellan stayed holed up across the river in the Pryor House, I think it is, and just had he had a whole division surrounding him for his protection. Just a very big difference in the way they commanded.
The whole location of McClellan's headquarters has been rethought now too, but we're not gonna talk about Union General. We're talking about.
I spent nights sleeping in that building. That better be it.
We're talking about the African American
I know.
I was going to say, it's a wonderful approach to tell the history of Tolson's Chapel through the eyes of one of the persons who lived back in those times, and did a wonderful job of portraying.
Yes.
You mentioned in your script about there being a hymn book with your name in it. One, did that exist?
It did, and.
It does.
It does,
Okay.
it does exist, and it's,
Okay.
isn't that the, battlefield?
It's at the, well,
It's just the ones at the chapel, but
the chapel owns it. And, I don't know if it's in the chapel currently or not, but the chapel owns a hymnal that has Teeny's name in it and the date 1869.
Wow.
And so we argue about what this means. Whether she was literate or not, I don't think she was. I don't think she was writing her name, but maybe she learned to write and that was why she wrote it. Who knows? She wasn't able to write earlier on. Anyway, we go round and round on this, but that's why we phrased it as she says, there is a hymnal with my name in it. 18. So she doesn't say in the script, I wrote my name in the hymnal. She says, there's a hymnal with my name, and just, expresses her pride in it. It could have been that she gave that hymnal to the chapel. It could have been that, it was written, her name was written in it so that she could learn to, read something, the hymns in it. It's sort of what you wonder why there would be a book with her name in it if she couldn't read, or wasn't trying to read. There were plenty of people, adult people who had been enslaved or had been illiterate and free before the Civil War, who attended schools in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War and tried to learn. There were adults who went to school. They knew the importance of learning to read. And even if they never learned to write, they might learn to read a little bit. So, there's a whole spectrum of literacy, reading and writing, two separate operations. So, there's a lot to wonder about there.
Well, that is real. How about, are some of the other artifacts that are in Tolson's Chapel, are they all replicas, or is some of that original as well?
Oh, no, we don't have replicas. They are actual artifacts. We
Okay.
also have 3 artifacts on loan to the battlefield. They had mentioned Nancy Campbell, who was not a member of Tolson's Chapel because she attended, I believe it was the Dunker Church, which was the church of her enslavers. But when she died, a Bible was passed to Tolson from her, so we have the Nancy Campbell Bible.
She left it in her will. And, I think about my own life. I've attended many churches. And I think Nancy Campbell might have sometimes attended Tolson's. We just don't know.
Well, she might have attended,
Yeah.
most likely, but she wasn't a member.
She was buried at the not the Dunker Church, the Manor Brethren Church. Manor Brethren.
Okay. So we have that artifact. We also have an inkwell, and we also have a primer unknown at the battlefield. But the items that we have are items that were original.
We also have some items that are period appropriate that didn't necessarily come from the chapel, like that desk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I donated, but it's not from the.
That was the books.
Yeah, the books. And we have books from other schools in the area. So, but we don't have replicas.
Yes, ma'am?
She kept referring to terrible times. And I wonder, it might be off topic, perhaps this is something you'd be dealing with at a later time. But were there any attacks on the chapel? Was it difficulty getting work? Is there anything in particular she's talking about that comes to mind in that period? I mean, you had the one burning of the church.
Yeah, there was a burning of a school in Fairplay a black school in Fairplay after the Civil War. I think when you look at the history of African Americans in the 19th century, anywhere in this country, but let's talk about specifically Washington County. And she does look back and say, Christina Watson talks about terrible times. when she's being interviewed about the Battle of Antietam. So she does specifically talk about that and says, I don't ever want to live through such times again. She lived through a battle that happened in the streets of Sharpsburg, and, bullets were flying, shells were bursting, around the house where she was in the basement. So specifically in the text we have from her, she's talking about that. But I think that ZSun-Nee was, when she, expanded that, I think she was, and you can chime in here, was quite rightly expanding that to talk about the terror and horrors of slavery that Christina had lived through for the first half of her life. She was owned by another person. She was separated from her husband. She couldn't live with her husband. She had to do whatever she was told to do, and that was a system of violence and duress. And, enslaved people in Washington County were regularly beaten, whipped, raped, and otherwise physically abused, and they were constantly living under the threat of being sold to the Deep South, having their children sold, having their spouses sold, and never seeing them again. This was what they lived with. Not just physical violence, but violence to their families and to their loved ones. And those were terrible times. And when they became free, the terrible times were not over. They weren't enslaved anymore, but they lived with other threats and other disadvantages and other kinds of second-class citizenship. I'm going to shut up now and let you comment on what you think.
No, but that's exactly right. Because as she said in the script, she's told you that even at the time of the script, when the script was supposed to have been written during those times, that she worried about her daughter.
Right.
And she said that, I'm not, that the people who lived there, the white people that lived there didn't want them there and they didn't really want them there and weren't too afraid to even let them know that. So, here's the funny thing, as I think about it. Black people who were enslaved, or you can call them African, whatever it is that you think of, but obviously black people mean is they had a double burden in a way. Number one, they worried about their families, and they had their own family problems and difficulties to deal with. And as strange as it seems, even though they were enslaved here in America, they also loved their country because it was all that they knew, and they felt a bond. So when you talk about war, they thought of it as something that also affected them. It was like they didn't want people to be at war with their country. It's schizophrenic is what it is. But that's what was going on. People were pulled in two different ways, So it was a terrible time.
Do you know where in Virginia she came from?
What did she say?
Where in Virginia?
Oh, where she said she did say she came from.
No,
Virginia.
probably pretty close. There were a lot of, so her father's name was Height, Mr. Height. That's all we know, Mr. Height, but probably pretty close. There were a lot of Heights just across the river in Berkeley County. So probably.
Don't forget West Virginia was Virginia then.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Throughout
All those counties in the Panhandle were part of Virginia.
the whole lower valley, there was
Yeah.
those type.
Yes.
A modern day question and one from the past. Do you know if there was anything that they knew about whenever, like the Dunker Church, they heard South Mountain, the battles of South Mountain? Is there any record of them hearing it there?
Sure.
And the modern part of it today, logistically it would be difficult, but like having a Good Friday service or an Easter service at the chapel?
You want to take the first part? I'll take
So South Mountain being heard
The Battle of South Mount was on a Sunday. And,
Right. Oh, but see, Tolson's Chapel was built after the Civil War.
oh, okay, I'm
It was
sorry.
built immediately after the Civil War by the newly freed people of
Okay.
Sharpsburg and the people who had all been freed already, but who had been free before, but, yeah, it didn't exist.
Okay,
Sorry.
So 1866.
okay.
And to the second part, we have a yearly Christmas by candlelight service. So we are there. I have been asked if we would have another service sometime during the year. And we will consider it. I don't know if you're familiar with what it looks like, but there is absolutely no parking. We had 2 lots that we used for parking, but a developer developed it. And most of our audience, to an earlier question, are older people. And so though the city has a lot that people could park in across from Nutters.
It's just that hill.
Yeah, and so I don't know, I've been toying with it, but services, the neighbors are very close.
Yeah.
But it is definitely something I
But,
was going
I thought you had a candlelight service. So,
And we
okay.
still do every Christmas.
Of course, it's difficult to have one when they have their lighted thing at, the first weekend of December. That
Oh,
would be,
at the
that would be
Battle?
difficult for you completely, yeah.
Yeah. But actually, our candlelight service is well attended, and we are very snug and close because it's so close.
Okay.
Oh, that's right. There's a lady here with her.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, our historical society in Keedysville came up and met Edie Wallace up there for one of our meetings. And it happened to be in the wintertime, and she said, dress warmly. She was not kidding. And, but it was by candlelight. It was absolutely wonderful. And this was several years ago, but really, people should go there and see it. It's just amazing. It was really cool. So, and I also have heard along just through the years that they used to have really good, I thought they were like fundraising things, and they sold fried chicken, and I heard it was extremely popular.
It was
With the
called
whole
our
community.
Rally Day program.
Yep.
And again, when the parking was taken, the site for the tents was also taken.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to reimagine a way to do that.
Yeah.
Because it was just an absolute
Right.
great event, and the townspeople look forward to it, and we
Yeah.
look forward to it. And so that'll be one of the things that we have to reimagine.
Good. And, oh, and another thing, when Hell Came to Sharpsburg, that book talked about how bad it was for all the towns down there. And literally, there was no food and lots of dead bodies and disease. So, it would have been no food for everybody that was still alive. It was rough.
And I thought I saw
I was wondering if there was any connection between the school at Tolson Chapel and Storer College in Harpersville.
It's a good question. So I don't know. Edie might know, but I don't know. But I'll bet that so there was a young man who sort of grew up in the congregation and became a teacher there. We're hoping to do our next video with him as the central character. His name was James. I know his name. It's on the tip of my tongue. I know his name. Simons. James Simons. And he was not college educated, but I expect that he was the sort of person who would be on the lookout for likely young people who were good students and would encourage them to go on to Storer College. Storer College was the black college in Harper's Ferry, for those of you who might not be familiar. And there are plenty of young people from Hagerstown who attended Storer College. And I seem to recall having run across one or two people in our photograph collection at the chapel who were Storer College students, but I'm not positive, so can't swear to it. Good question. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. Probably.
So it looks like that's all the questions, but there are members of the Friends of Tolson's Chapel board here, and I'd like them to stand in addition to ZSun-Nee and I, and Emilie, a former board member, but still active member. So if the board members could please stand. Thank you. That's our vice president and our secretary and our soon-to-be board member. So thank you all so much.
Is this still working?
Yes.
If you are interested in reading about African Americans and the Battle of Antietam in Sharpsburg, I have written a book, which you can get here in the library and borrow here in the library, called Black Antietam by Emilie Amt. Came out during the pandemic. You can also buy it locally for about $22. Makes a great gift. Thank you.
And if you all would like to support Friends of Tolson's Chapel, definitely please support us by liking our Facebook page. Thank you. If you would like to support our efforts at Tolson's Chapel to get the word out about these people, real life people in this area, definitely please like and follow our Facebook page. You can also join or make donations through the page or through our website.
A worthy cause.
It is, that's right. I just want to say, it's so funny about history. And as I portrayed this role, I must tell you that it got to me when I thought that she mentioned people such as General Lee. I think I got the floor. I can say, okay, and I just want to say that it's all of us that are sitting here have ties that we have no idea that bring us together. As a friend of mine said, we are like chicken wire. We are just that interconnected with everybody. So at least you know that. And I want you to know that part of my family is involved with the Lee family and General Washington family and George Washington Parke Custis. So all of this in my head as I was portraying this, I'm thinking, I wonder what our ancestors are thinking with me talking about this war, etc. It's a wonderful kind of, feeling to know how interconnected we are.
And lastly, I would like to thank the librarian, Jenny, for having us here again this year.
Okay.
Our pleasure, indeed. Thank you.